Good morning, friends. Welcome to the NCFCA Online Summit. My name is Amy Joy Tofty, and it is my pleasure to serve as the Director of Education for NCFCA. We're so glad you're here today. This is day 3, and we're moving into interpretation speeches. These are 10-minute speeches that bring literature to life and give you an opportunity to use stories as a way to communicate your message to your audience. Since 2001, NCFCA has empowered Christian students to apply and communicate their worldview with skill and clarity. Through regional and national competitions supported by robust training, and tens of thousands of students have demonstrated confidence and excellence in communicating truth with grace. To meet your own challenge, visit www.ncfca.org. You're here for our online summit, which is a free one-week workshop that lays a firm foundation for a variety of speech and debate events. In this session, you'll enjoy 30 minutes of live teaching, followed by a giveaway, which today is some great swag from our friends at Concordia University. We'll finish up our time together with a live Q&A session. If you like what you're seeing here and you want to take the next step to learn even more, we want to invite you back for our NCFCA Online Intensive taking place August 3rd through the 7th. We'll offer interactive sessions where you'll get to interact with your teachers and your coaches. You'll have live breakout room activities, so you'll get to meet students from across the country. And you'll receive great feedback so that when you leave, you have a speech and all the tools necessary to move forward into the competition season. The spaces are extremely limited, so if you're excited to get started, visit ncfca.org/intensive. Now, to get the most out of the session, please fully focus on the speaker and use the chat box only when you're asked a direct question. We'll be pausing the chat box during those times just to give you the opportunity to really focus in on what's being taught. If you have questions about NCFCA, either the resources or our competitive opportunities, I want to invite you to come back today at 4 o'clock. That's Central Time. And we're going to have the national leadership team here to answer your questions. We'll tell you all about NCFCA and make sure that you know how to take the next step if you're interested in starting with us. If you have tech issues, you can contact Summit Tech at ncfca.org and we'll help you as quickly as possible. And then finally, if you have specific questions about the material being presented in this session, we invite you to submit your questions by clicking on the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. In Matthew chapter 13, Jesus is telling parables and the disciples stop him and they say, "Why are you teaching in parables?" And he goes on to explain to them that the kingdom of heaven is revealed oftentimes through these stories for the eyes that are open and the ears that are open to receive them. And he says to them in verse 16, "But blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear." And so today in session 7, we're going to be talking about selecting quality literature and using literature as an opportunity to share a message with your audience. So we'll be analyzing literature with 3 questions, understanding the principles of universal appeal, and then selecting themes that have a personal connection. So your instructor today is Natalia Rosa. Natalia is a Region 4 NCFCA alumnus who competed in value debate and 10 speech events. She's also the editor of the NCFCA Comprehensive Guide to Speech and currently serves as the NCFCA Director of Marketing. Would you please welcome Mrs. Natalia Rosa?
Good morning, friends. I know a lot of us have been here together since Monday, and now we're on day 3, diving into a whole new style of speaking. And so I have a fun fact to kick off the morning for you, and that is I want to teach you that there actually is a different way to do something that you probably do on a weekly basis. So most of us, if we go to eat a little banana snack, we'll open the banana from the top. But there is a fun fact that you can actually open a banana a different way, and that is from the bottom. Some actually argue that this is a lot easier because you don't mush the banana that you're wanting to eat. And you might be thinking, why am I showing this fun fact for you in the beginning of our speech session? Well, it is because if you have been with us since the beginning of this week, then you have started with learning about platform speeches. And then yesterday we moved into limited preparation speeches. You learned all about structure and how to incorporate stories, how to have a really compelling introduction and closing, how to incorporate strong analysis. And then we closed the day out with extemporaneous speaking, which was all about current event topics. We talked about politics and economic theory and how you can address international and domestic affairs. And so today, when we dive into interpretation speaking, you might feel a little bit like we are flipping that banana around and showing you a different way to approach topics. But what I want for you to understand is that even though we are talking about stories and we're going to dive into actually interpreting written pieces of literature later in the day, how to act out those different pieces, I want you to keep in mind that we're still addressing the same central topics. So in any speech, whether it's a platform, regular speaking style, what you might think of when you think of public speaking, or an interpretation where you're acting out a story, you're still addressing life issues and central themes that are really important for you to wrestle through. So let's go ahead and answer a question that's probably top of mind, and I've seen it pop up in the Q&A panel already. That question is, what is interpretation? And I'm not going to go into the details of specific event styles and rules because all of that information is going to be available to you on the NCFCA website, but I do want to give you the framework for those who are new, that interpretation is essentially breathing life into a written piece of literature. And for NCFCA events in particular, interpretation is act of taking a story that has been published, or for some events, writing a story of your own, cutting that down to under 10 minutes, and then presenting that story in front of an audience with either no props and no other people with you at all, or very limited props, as you see demonstrated in this PowerPoint presentation with the binder that the guy is holding over his head. And in the one speech event, you do actually have an opportunity to act out your story with one other person. So that would be duo, two people in the interpretation. So that framework in mind, let's dive into theater of the mind and specifically how you can go about selecting a quality piece of literature. What is the best way to do that? So I am going to ask you to participate in this very interactive session. We are going to be working through an activity together, and we're going to talk about analyzing a piece by taking a look at these 5 different elements of a compelling story and quality literature. So those are going to be universal appeal, characters, plotline, setting, and length and format. And so here's what I want you to do. Pull out 2 pieces of paper. I have a demonstration here on the screen. And let's say you have 2 pieces, or if you're like me and you like to use a notebook, pull those out now. And on one, I want you to either draw a little sketch, visual representation of each of the words that I shared on the previous slide, and I'll go back in a second, or write the label in the left-hand column. So you're going to write down universal appeal, characters, plotline, setting, length, and format. And we'll drop that list in the chat for you in case you need to reference those different points. Write those down in the left-hand column on one page. And then on the other page, I want you to draw a line straight down the middle and then label one side challenges and the other side advantages. And we're going to use these 2 sheets for our activity in selecting a quality piece of literature. So I'll go back to this slide briefly for those who are note takers, and then we're going to dive right into the activity. So there are a few things that I want you to think about when you're trying to find a piece of literature that's really high quality and is going to work well for interpretation, whether you're doing it for fun, to act out a story in front of your friends and family, or for NCFCA competition. These broad questions are, first, you need to find a piece that you love. So when you're thinking about a piece, do you love that piece? And this is important, especially if you're going to be using the piece for competition, because you're going to be practicing and presenting the speech for almost a year. And if you don't love it, if this is just an assignment, then you're gonna have a hard time sticking with one piece over and over again. The second broad question to keep in mind is, does this piece allow for originality? So is there something about you that really connects with this piece? And can you add something original? You might be thinking, Natalia, I have no idea how to even go about making this original. Don't worry, we'll unpack that with our worksheets. But just keep that question in mind. The third broad question is, will this piece provide an opportunity for personal growth? And so as we go into the activity and filling out the worksheet, I'm going to frame this for our two groups who have joined us today. If you are brand new, then your adventure in this activity is going to be to use one story along with me, and that is going to be The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe from the Narnia series. I'm excited. I think y'all are going to be excited too, because I already saw in the chat before this presentation that that is a favorite story for many of you. So you're going to track with me. If you're advanced, go ahead and use a piece that you are already considering for competition for this next season, or just pick a current book you're reading or one that's a favorite so you can do the exercise as well. Here are the questions we are going to dive into to analyze our selected piece of literature. For most of us, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. All right, so that first one is universal appeal. What is universal appeal? We're gonna open up the chat, and if you wanna give a brief description, what do you think that means? I'm gonna give you just a second to respond. What does it mean to choose a piece of literature that has universal appeal? A book that everyone will like, everyone likes it, everyone's read it, everyone loves it. Okay, great answers here. Yeah, you're on track. Part of it does have to do with, is this a book that's familiar to many people? So let's take The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe as an example. Is that a book that is familiar to many people? Probably yes. So I want you to jot down that note on your notes page. But let me read this definition. Universal appeal means universal appeal is rooted in truths that transcend time and culture. Literature with universal appeal touches the human spirit, evokes human emotion, or makes a personal connection through human relationships. And so oftentimes a piece that's really well known is well known because it does these things. It connects with something in us where we say, I see myself reflected in that story, and it's appealing to me, it's compelling to me because it relates to my life. So Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, let's think about that one. It does have universal appeal. It's well known. Why is that? And what do you think some of the advantages and challenges are if something is well known or not? So go ahead and tell me in the chat, since The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is well known, what do you think an advantage would be in presenting that story as an interpretation? Advantage is it's familiar, many people know it, they understand it, there's less you'd have to explain, less confusion. Excellent. Okay, so now let's flip. What would some of the challenges be in the fact that a lot of people are familiar with this story? You have to make it stand out. It might seem dull to some people. You have to make it original. Excellent. Yep, you guys are right on track. So write those notes down on your worksheet. And if you're using your own story, consider those questions as well. This is something that I want you all to understand. When you're analyzing a piece of literature, every piece is going to have challenges and advantages, and you'll never find a piece that only has advantages. So your responsibility is to stay really curious and to do the work ahead of time in analyzing this literature to figure out what will the advantages and challenges be, and does that match up with, you know, the kind of person that I am, the content that I should be meditating on for a whole year, and is this going to provide an opportunity for me to grow? So last point under universal appeal, tell me, what themes in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe do you think resonate with the reader? So why is this piece so well known and loved? Tell me in the chat. Why is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe well known and loved? Give me themes that people can relate to. Redemption, bravery, loyalty. the story of good versus evil, hope. It's a classic. Excellent, yes. This is really important work. If you can start to tease out the themes that are meaningful, this is going to help you understand if your piece is a quality piece of literature that's worth interpreting or not. All right, next topic. So now you should be moving down your page to the characters section. We are going to take a look at all of the different characters that are in our book. So go ahead and tell me in the chat, answering this first question, how many characters do you think are crucial to the story? So already start thinking about, if you're going to have to tell this story, who is absolutely important? Because remember, it's just going to be you, possibly one other person, who are presenting this speech at the end. So is this a piece of literature that's going to work for you? Is it going to be a high quality piece? Go ahead and tell me in the chat, what characters do you think would be crucial to portraying the story of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe? Aslan, Lucy. Some of you are saying all of them. I understand. That's probably how you're going to feel in the beginning. It's all important, but this is the exercise of learning to trim down the story. Okay, the witch. Yep. Great. Edmund, Peter, Susan. Yes, excellent. High King, Tumnus. Very good. I love that y'all are familiar with this story. Okay, next question in the chat. Does the piece provide a variety of characters in the story? So are all of the characters really similar, or do you think that there's some good variety in the story? Let me know what you think. And you can think about a lot of different factors here, right? So age, people and animals in this story in particular, right? Different emotions. Do all of the characters struggle with the same thing, or do they have a lot of different personal struggles? Start to break the story down through the lens of each character. So let's just think about Edmund. What is his struggle? You know, is he crucial to the story? Does he stand out from the other characters? Why is that? Great job in the chat providing lots of different responses to this question. We're going to go ahead and pause the chat. And now I want you to work through your worksheet. The next question for characters, how similar or different are you, the one who's going to be presenting this story, from the characters in the book? This is going to be a different answer for all of us. So if I'm answering this question, I might think I'm most similar to Susan in age, the fact that I'm a girl, some of my life experiences, you know, she's on the older side. I was older and have younger siblings. So start to draw similarities and differences between yourself and those main characters, and think about what challenges and advantages that might pose when you go to present your interpretation. The last question for characters is, can you identify with the characters' main emotions and experiences? Main emotions and experiences. So let's pick one character to start with. A lot of you mentioned that Edmund is likely really crucial to the story of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Are there emotions that Edmund experiences in the story that you think, I've been there, I've felt that way, or I've done those things? Maybe not in particular, you know, maybe I haven't betrayed my family in Aslan in the way that Edmund did, but maybe I've put myself and my selfish desires first. How could I relate to the characters in this story? And so here's what I'm wanting you to evaluate. As you're filling out the notes on the one sheet, right now in the characters section, start to brainstorm the challenges and advantages for you personally when you go to act out this story. Some of you might be thinking, hey, I'm a 14-year-old boy. Acting out Edmund is actually going to be pretty easy. This character is not terribly different from the person that I am. I can relate to his emotions. I can relate to how he interacts with his siblings. There may be others that feel like that's going to be really hard. Okay, maybe you started thinking about Aslan, how that could be a challenge, acting out that particular character. So jot down some of those challenges and advantages in the other worksheet as you go. The next question that we're going to talk about is plot line. And for the plot line, I want you to think of that really simple line that goes up. So you have the intro of a story, kind of rising action, the climax, which is the tipping point of the book. Everything's at stake. Things could go really well or they could go really terribly. The characters could win it all or they could lose it all. What's that point? And then how does the story get resolved so your audience can kind of let out that deep breath and feel like there's been redemption at the close of your piece of literature? We'll use The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe as our example in answering questions about plotline. Does the story have a strong plot curve? I want you to write down on your page yes or no if you think that's true for The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Do you think it has a strong introduction, good rising action, a really important scene where everything's at stake, and then does it resolve in the end? And in that, what is the most powerful scene or moment in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe to you? Identify that particular scene. What is the scene that was most gripping that you remember from the book? We're going to open up the chat again now that you've had a moment to think. And so if you could put in your response, what is the most powerful scene or important moment in the story to you? When Aslan dies, the stone table, when Aslan comes back, when Edmund eats the Turkish delight. That's a funny one, but actually you are hitting on a really important point. There could be a lot of little subplots within one long story. And so that's important. If that's the scene that resonates most with you, when Edmund sort of goes with his own selfish personal desires and sacrifices some of the bigger picture, go ahead and jot that down on your page, because that may lead you in a particular way to cut this piece down the road. When Edmund is forgiven, beautiful, great. Okay, I'm going to share with you the scene that stands out the most to me, and I've actually clipped one little sentence here. What I would identify as the climax is when Aslan says, in response to Susan, this is after the stone table, when he comes back, Susan says, "What does it all mean?" And Aslan replies, "It means that though the witch knew the deep magic, there is a magic deeper still which she did not know. Her knowledge goes back only to the dawn of time, but if she could have looked a little further back into the stillness and the darkness before time dawned, she could have read there a different incantation. She would have known that when a willing victim who committed no treachery, was killed in a traitor's stead, the table would crack and death itself would start working backwards." And so that's the theme that stands out to me personally. It's not the only important theme, but this is the one that I would probably highlight, jot down some notes on my worksheet as that point of redemption, and that whole concept that death was now working backwards, right? There's redemption and a new light that has come into the world of Narnia. So you've identified for this particular work, yep, we definitely have a strong plot line, lots of different ways we could take it. That's going to be a session for another day for you to choose which one, but there's good content here. The last question, and I'm going to leave this for you to mull over after the session, is the message of the story important to you personally, and why? Okay, is the message of the story important to you personally, and why? Think about that after this session for The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And then when you take the next step, or if you're the advanced student evaluating a new piece, ask yourself this question: what is the main message of the story? And then, is it important to you personally? If so, why? That's going to give you a lot of insight into whether or not this is a quality piece of literature for you to perform this year. The next point on the worksheet we're going to brainstorm is setting. And so as you research literary options, keep in mind that you're going to have some constraints as to props and supporting actors. For most of the interpretation presentations, it's just going to be you. And you're going to be utilizing what we call theater of the mind to sort of paint this picture for your audience of what's happening. So here's some questions to ask when you're evaluating the setting of the story to see if it's a good story for you to use in interpretation. First, where does the story take place? We're going to open up the chat. Y'all can start to add your answers. And note that there's probably not just one location for this story that we're looking at. I could tell you a few that come to my mind. The story takes place in Narnia, right? It takes place in England. We could even think in the larger context of this story is set in the middle of a war. So that's where the children, that's what they're experiencing culturally in the actual geographical location of England. So how would we portray some of those tensions? That could be tricky. Narnia, think about those challenges and those advantages. How are you going to portray the fantasy world of Narnia? This is really going to apply to some of the characters that you wrote down as crucial to the piece. So if you've decided that Mr. Tumnus is essential to the piece, how are you going to portray that character? What about the beavers? How are you going to portray the beaver family if that's crucial to your piece? Start to write down all of these different settings. Is there significant variety for this? The story is yes. Challenges and advantages of that. It's probably not going to be dull, but you might run into some obstacles in how to portray all of these settings without the use of props and scenery around you. Where do characters physically go throughout the story? And you could break this down into really specific scenes, like Lucy has to walk through the wardrobe. We have to somehow show that she's walking through snow. That could end up being tricky. So brainstorm some of those scenes and then challenges and advantages on the separate page. A few more questions for you to work through after this session. Are there physical traits of the characters that are crucial to them? So for example, the fact that some of these characters are animals, Aslan being a lion, is that crucial to his character? Yeah, probably. So think about challenges and advantages of how you're going to portray that particular character. How is that going to work for you? And does the setting dictate any particular accents or languages? And this one, you all noted that the setting of the story is England and then Narnia. So think about, there's that possibility that you could do a British accent. Is that a challenge, advantage? Is that essential to the story that you have a British accent? Or could you maybe change your interpretation of the piece if you don't feel comfortable doing a British accent? Just start to brainstorm through all of those different pieces. And next, move on to the question of length and format. So we are going to open up the chat again briefly and tell me, do you think you would be able to present the entire story of Narnia in 10 minutes? If not, how long do you think the presentation would be? If you were going to do a full presentation of every scene that's in the book, how long do you think it would take you to do that interpretation? We'll see what your estimates are. Hours is what most of you are saying. Yes. And we know this in part because lots of us have probably seen movies or plays on The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Not every book is like that, but I want you all to think about it for your selections. How long is the book? And then what are challenges and advantages of that, okay? Because there will likely be both. So the advantage of choosing a really short story is that you may not have to do very much cutting down to get to 10 minutes. And so that can be really helpful when you're starting out. Now, the disadvantages or the challenges might be that you don't have a whole lot to work with, or that you're even trying to really stretch the content in the book so that you can get to the 10-minute mark or close to the 10-minute mark. So consider the challenges and advantages. And here's where you are going to get a little bit more specific to the theme that was most important to you in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Is it possible, since there's no way for you to do every single piece of the story, is it possible that you could trim that whole story down to a few key scenes and still maintain that strong plot line curve where you have an intro, rising action, the climatic point of the story, and then good resolution? off the top of your head, this is a good point to start thinking about and even sketching. What are the crucial scenes for this story? And what are the challenges and disadvantages going to be in transitioning from one point to another? So let's open up the chat and hear your responses. What scenes do you think would be crucial for a 10-minute portrayal of the lion, the witch, and the wardrobe? And then this is something for you to brainstorm on paper. If you just narrow the story down to those scenes, do you still maintain the impact, intro, rising action, climax, conclusion of the story? So y'all are pulling out really great themes here. Lucy's entrance into Narnia. A lot of you said that, coming through the wardrobe. Aslan's death and resurrection. Yes, the stone table. Excellent. Some of you said Edmund's point of the Turkish delight, betrayal, salvation, Aslan's death. Very good. You're doing a great job thinking through the crucial pieces of a plot line and the theme that you identified as most important to you, as well as how the characters themselves fit within that theme. So at this point in your brainstorming, you have 2 sheets. You've now really analyzed your selection of literature. Then you have outlined the challenges and the advantages. And what I hope you now see is that answering the question of how do you select a quality piece of literature requires you to do the work. And so this is the joy of interpretation. You have to be a little bit like a detective, and you have to stay really curious and evaluating the book. And here's what I would encourage you to do for the next step, especially advanced students. Now that you have done that analysis, I would encourage you to have a conversation about all those points with another person. So draw your parents into the conversation, draw your friends into the conversation, and ask them about those challenges, the advantages, what theme stands out to them. Start to practice telling them the story with just the key scenes that you've identified, and see if it makes sense, especially if they're not familiar with the story already. I would really encourage you, make this part of analyzing your literature the point where you include other people in the process, because I can tell you from experience, one of the most frustrating things is to do all of the work of selecting a book. Maybe you speed through that process, cutting it down to 10 minutes. We'll show you how to do that later. Practicing it, presenting it, and then finding out this story does not resonate with other people. Or you know what, they could have really helped me if I had brought them into the analysis in the very beginning. So bring people into the process now. And what I will encourage you to do, if you are brand new, or if these are new concepts and this process is new to you for advanced students, is take a look at the NCFCA Comprehensive Guide to Speech, because I've just walked you through the first portion of Module A, and the next portion is going to apply all of those concepts to who you are as the presenter, so you can figure out if, based on your age and your skill set and your emotional maturity and your analytical ability at this point, if the piece is a really good fit for you. So just a couple of thoughts before we jump into the live Q&A and begin to field all of your specific questions based on the content we've covered. I really encourage you to keep in mind that the purpose of telling a story is to help the audience member, the listener, see a little bit of themselves reflected in the story that you're telling, and to gain something valuable from that. Whether you are presenting a story that is really simple or incredibly complex, whether you are 12 years old and you're presenting a Dr. Seuss story, or maybe you're 18 and you have endeavored to cut down Les Mis, the giant book that it is, down to 10 minutes to present it for a speech. You want to present a story that the audience member sees a little bit of themselves in and can learn from. And so spend a lot of time thinking about the message that you're about to meditate on for a whole year. Is it something, going to the verse in Philippians that's beautiful, that's lovely, that's praiseworthy, even if it's a funny piece or a really hard piece that deals with difficult issues, does it lead you to a point of redemption where you are growing as a person? and learning something new through the process of acting out the story. Because at the end of the day, every speech event is about your growth in the process. And so I would encourage you to keep that in mind as you select your piece of literature. With that, we are going to open up for question and answers time. But I am first going to announce our giveaway. So Amy Joy, if you want to join in as I select the giveaway, then I know we'll move into our Q&A session. Our giveaway today is provided by Concordia University. And Concordia University is proud to be Austin's leading Christian university where Christ is honored and students of all backgrounds are welcome. They are giving away a fun swag pack. There was a picture in the introduction, and the winner of that giveaway is, drum roll, the Pennington Clan. Pennington Clan. So Pennington Clan, if you could email summittech@ncfca.org, we will make sure that you claim your prize.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Natalia. I can tell by the questions in the question and answer box that we have a lot of great thoughts here. And we're going to jump right in with, can you just tell me from your perspective what some of your favorite stories are, or story types, if you will?
Story types, yes. Well, I think this is where it becomes a personal question because we all gravitate towards themes that mean a lot to us. But I love stories that have a little bit of history or some kind of historical setting, and also touch on themes of redemption. So The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is one of those books for me. Les Mis is another book, kind of on the other end of the spectrum of a really long book that is all about redemption.
Yes. I do think it's important. Students are asking, happy versus sad, or mystery versus historical fiction. And, a lot of that comes down to what's really going to resonate with you. I know you've talked a lot about that in the platform speeches. So just tell a little bit about that personal connection and why that's so important.
Well, this ties into what we've been saying throughout all of the sessions, that the act of preparing these speeches, it's not just for competition. We're really all about the educational process for you and how you're going to use these skills outside of competition and for the rest of your life. So it's important that you already start to identify what are the kinds of stories that you like, and then why do you like those stories? So why am I drawn to stories about redemption? Why am I drawn to the characters and stories who really struggle with pride and then overcome that? Maybe it's because that's something that I struggle with myself, and I know that is the case. So that's why I'm encouraging through the session, learn to ask questions as you analyze the piece, because it is really overwhelming to just answer the big topic of, is this quality literature? If you can break it down into, is this a meaningful story for you? Why? How could you communicate that to others? You're going to get a lot closer to the truth of who God's created you to be and how you can bless other people with that.
So we talk about the concept of universal appeal, and we also talk about the concept of quality. So let's flesh that out just a little bit. Are all classics, would all of them fit into the universal appeal category?
It's a really good question. I think the answer is likely no. And so you have to go back to the definition that was presented. Universal appeal is really about, does this resonate with people's human experiences? Do they see a little bit of themselves reflected in that story? And then I think it's important, especially as Christians, for us to ask, why is that? And then what's the benefit of me as a presenter putting myself in those shoes? So there are some stories in some classics that really focus in on very dark elements of the human experience. And so maybe there is universal appeal and the piece is well known because of that, because the truth is there are elements of the human experience that are very dark. But then there's kind of that second question for the quality literature point. Is that a good thing for you to stew in as a student right now and to portray for 10 minutes to a variety of audiences over and over again? It's a very personal question. I think the answer, if there's no redemption to it, is likely going to be no. And there's some good direction for you in the NCFCA rules about that. That's also why I would just encourage you to draw your parents and other trusted advisors into the discussion so you can evaluate, even though this piece is well known, is it really quality literature, and does it have a theme that I want to be meditating on and portraying to people for an entire year?
That's great. So we have a question here about you specifically, Natalia. Can you tell the students what your very first interpretive speech was, and then how did that go for you?
That's a great question. My very first interpretive speech was a duo interpretation from the book Alone Yet Not Alone.
Oh, yes.
For those who don't know the story, it's based roughly on true events, but it's during the French and Indian War, two sisters who are captured and then separated. The rest of their family is lost, and then how they find each other years down the road. How did that go for me? It was a tough piece, let me tell you, especially for year one, and being 15 years old, trying to portray lots of different characters that were beyond the scope of who I was. It was difficult. As far as competition goes, did not advance at the national championship, didn't really have any great success. But that same year, and this is why I'm passionate about interpretation, I really found my voice with another story, which was The Miracle Worker, about the life of Helen Keller and the life of her teacher, Anne Sullivan. And how did that go? That one, I did actually make it to the national championship and was the runner-up. So very crazy experience first year, but I think the reason for that is that there was a lot of congruency between who I was and the characters that I was portraying. And it was a pretty simple storyline. So a good match.
That's great. Is it better to pick a full-length novel or a short story? And can you just talk a little bit about the advantages and challenges of each one?
Yes. Is it better? That's the million-dollar question. We always just want other people to tell us, what is better, this or that?
Yes.
Again, you're going to have to answer these questions for yourself. Challenges and disadvantages. Challenge, if it's a long piece of literature, so I'm going to show you an example. I have here, Les Mis. Okay. You see how thick it is. If you're going to try to trim this down to 10 minutes,
yes,
the challenge is going to be time, for one. How invested are you in reading this book multiple times, wrestling through? It's going to be a larger time investment, I would guess, to cut this down than a Dr. Seuss piece. So those are going to be some of the challenges. Usually the storyline is a lot more complex. So for example, with Les Mis, I think you would have a really difficult time trying to portray the entire plot line. So you may end up choosing a subplot line, maybe just the first few chapters and a segment of the story. So that might be challenge and advantage. The advantage being of a longer piece that you have a lot to pull from, and you can really get to know your characters. So yes, you have to read this many pages, but this many pages also gives you information on the theme and the emotions and who your characters are and what they're learning. So advantages for a short story, probably it's going to be a lot easier in practice to cut that down to 10 minutes. I would really encourage, if you are brand new and starting out, start with something that is going to let you focus and learn each step without getting really stuck on any particular step. So you're going to move through the cutting process a lot more quickly with a short story. Start there. Once you've gained some skills, challenge yourself with something a little bit harder.
That's great. We have quite a few questions that are very specific to our NCFCA rules. So I just want to encourage those of you who have asked those questions. You are welcome to visit our website, www.ncfca.org. You can go to the resource library and find the rules for each of our events. And then if you still have questions beyond that, we do have a speech committee that will entertain those questions. So that's the best way to find out the specifics of the rules. Let's go on talking a little bit about humor. Do all humorous speeches need to have a message? That's a really common question that people are interested in.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that the question that precedes that question is, what is the purpose of public speaking? Any form of public speaking, whether it's extemp or it's platform or it's interp. What's your goal here? You're using up your own time, other people's time. I think that every speech, every story should have a message. And I think every story actually does have a message. That's right. What my challenge to you would be. Whether it's funny, whether it's sad, the story has a message. And so I would encourage you to identify, what is that message? How can you communicate it? And to make a note that you can communicate something really deep and powerful in a funny or very subtle way. So I'm even thinking of, one year I saw somebody do a portrayal from the book Cheaper by the Dozen. Lots of humor. I think, no one ever cried in that speech. People were laughing the whole time. A lot of it was slapstick humor. But at the core of that story, there was still a really beautiful message about the joy of relationships and family and how those bonds last for life, how they're meaningful.
Yes. So
that's my encouragement to you. There always is a message. Find it, make sure it's one that's worth saying.
That's fantastic. So we have some questions about how that process of cutting this literature down, and aren't you changing the story? I know you have another session in the online intensive that's going to talk about that. Can you just share a little bit about a sneak peek of what that's going to be about?
Absolutely. I have purposefully set this up so that you want more because we are going to continue this entire process actually using the story of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe throughout today's sessions and then into the intensive next week. So next week, I am going to be teaching the session in the intensive where we actually cut a chapter from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And we're going to talk about all of the details, both in instruction and then in coaching activities in small groups, answering those questions you just asked. How do you trim it down? Isn't that sacrilegious to change the book? Are there rules to that? What's allowed, what's not allowed? Not to worry, it will all be covered, but it can't be covered today because It's a lot of information.
It is indeed. Let's go to the topic of content and just those kind of the upper limits of content. So one of our questions here today is, do all speeches have to be PG?
That is a great question. Again, you're going to learn that I often answer questions with questions. Mm-hmm. So what's your motivation in asking that? And also, what do you mean by PG? Because again, I think at the end of the day, your goal is for your audience to take something of meaning and worth away from your speech and to see a little bit of themselves or humanity reflected in the story. So part of this life and living in a broken world is that there are very dark and broken parts of it. They can also be redeemed. And so I think some of this is the discussion that you need to have with your parents, with people that you trust about where are you at right now? What content should you be meditating on? And then how can you present even difficult topics so that it's not just for shock value, because we don't gain anything from that, but to where you can show the redemption side of it, where you can challenge people towards meaning and hope. So I'll give you an example from my story. When I did my portrayal of the miracle worker, there's some really difficult concepts in that story, especially from the angle that I took, which was the life of Anne Sullivan, Helen's teacher. And so in my portrayal, I talked a little bit about, in the play, the storyline is that Anne Sullivan actually spent some time in an asylum when she was young with her little brother, and her brother passed away in that asylum. So it's a really hard scene, and Anne is kind of haunted by that throughout her life, and knowing that she in some way feels like she failed her brother. Mm-hmm. It's dark, right? None of us would say, oh, that's necessarily PG or happy story. But I think the beauty is tying it into, what do we do with that? And for NCFCA in particular, how do we approach those difficult life issues from a biblical worldview? And so bringing some redemption, in the story of Anne Sullivan and Helen Keller, it's how she gets past those difficult experiences by then reaching out to this girl, Helen, and walking her through the process. She can understand some of the difficulties, some of the pain, and she herself finds healing in turning around and helping somebody else.
Great. Natalia, I just want to press in a little bit on what you said there, that there are redemptive stories, and then there are also stories that are left to challenge the audience. Mm-hmm. So can you just talk about that a little bit? One of the questions here is, does every story have to have a happy ending?
Excellent question. Yeah. I'll give you another example because that's the easiest way to think about it in my mind. So I've seen portrayals of the book Frankenstein that really challenge the audience. If you've read Frankenstein, not a particularly happy ending, not really much redemption. And that's kind of the point. That's the point of the story. You know, what happens when man takes this whole idea of making something in his creation into his own hands? What are the ramifications? What are the consequences? And really the story is just about teasing out some of those different themes and showing you dark ending. That's what happens. It is okay to portray stories that have sad endings or dark endings. But again, I want to encourage you, it needs to be for a purpose, not just leaving people at the end with a heavy feeling like, oh, great, you just handed me this burden and now I'm supposed to carry it, right? So you need to tease out what's the theme that you want them to wrestle with and to what purpose. And you don't always have to say, and the moral of the story is, things are dark, but there can also be redemption. You don't have to spell it out, but just challenging your audience with some of those themes and knowing what the meaning is what's important.
That's really helpful. And I will tell you that particular story is not one that I enjoyed reading when I was young, but we studied it this summer in the NCFCA book club with The Deadliest Monster by Jeff Baldwin. Yes. And I will tell you at the end of that, just seeing that in a whole different light and what is the purpose behind what you're using, as opposed to the moral of the story is, and then giving your 5-word, synopsis tag there. So I think those are great questions to ask and have conversations. So a lot of times we see students, jump into speeches and they're halfway through the season. Have questions now, have conversations now with your parents and your coaches and people who are influential in your life, and ask those questions so that you have a story that you really want to meditate on and think about for the next, 6 to 9 months. So that's great. I love this question from Lily. She says, does watching interpretation speeches help you to do better in performing your own?
That is a great question. I'll tell you my personal story is that's how I started. I watched great speeches and, we've talked a little bit about this over the past couple days. That's where you start with learning, is observing the masters, right? What does well? But here is my caution. You want to watch them for the purpose of inspiration and not purely imitation. So watch the speeches so you can learn and so you can reflect particular elements that you think, I see why they did well, because their facial expressions here, or the way that they reflect the introduction and the conclusion, that's really incredible. I should do that too. What you don't want to do is just use it as the shortcut or excuse of not doing work, kind of the copy paste. Oh, they did that, I'm going to do exactly that so I don't have to do the work of analyzing my character. So definitely watch speeches. The NCFCA YouTube channel, it's NCFCA Speech and Debate, is a really great source for that. You can see the Showcase of Excellence from many different years. And the Showcase of Excellence is a recording of all the first place championship speakers in each particular event for that year at the national championship.
That's great. Thank you so much, Natalia. So I would love to hear just a few personal things from you. Several people have asked, can you explain the scene behind you right now?
Oh, yes. You're going to think I did this just for you. So the pages, they are pages from a book on my back wall. It's actually from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And it's the original book that I had from when I was really little that I read, and it was completely falling apart. So my parents had actually thrown it in the trash and I saw it there. I said, no, that has so many memories, I'm taking it. But the binding was broken, so I took it apart and I put it on my wall.
And I do just want to verify that I've known Natalia for quite some time, and it has been on her wall for a very long time, not just for this session, but I love that story. So for those of you who are just getting started, we're so glad that you're here. There is plenty more to come. So come back in our next session and we'll continue to spell out some more information about interpretation speeches. And then I do want to encourage you, if you want to know how to put this into practice, join the online intensive, because we're going to have live breakout sessions where you're actually taking literature and you're practicing using all of these skills. So again, that is www.ncfca.org/intensive. Natalia, thank you so much for being here. It's always a pleasure, my friend. And I know that we're going to see you again in the intensive as well.
Yes, and I hope as many of you who can will join us. We do have limited spots, but I can't wait to see you there.
That's great. Have a great day, everyone. We'll see you back here at 1 o'clock for another interpretation speech session.